Fuzzy dice? Check. Whack-a-con bobblehead doll? Check. Diesel incense? Check. Cool. Look at me.
What
I'm
is
a
going
taxi
on,
cab
everyone?
driver.
Welcome to another fantastic Tuesday here on the Exploding Dice channel. My name is Askren, and I am your host. And welcome to Fuzzy Dice, the Dungeon Master Show. Did I say that? No, I don't think I did. I always screw up the title and the intro. Guys, welcome and thank you for joining us. We have a fantastic show lined up for you because after much attempting to make this happen, I have finally pinned him down and gotten him on board. I'm hanging out on this side with Mr. Tom LOMMEL. How's it going, my friend?
I'm a very, very important person, so I'm glad that I've finally been able to.
The secret is that he's very slippery. Like there's just a layer of, I don't know, what is it? Oil? It's Vaseline.
It's my natural pores. That is definitely my 100% natural complexion. This is not makeup or otherwise enhanced. You're getting the full natural LOMMEL right now.
The full LOMMEL. That's something. That's something to be proud of.
Yes, I don't know if you have to be proud of it, but it's the only thing I've got.
Well, hopefully we're going to have some fantastic discussion for you guys. It's going to be a lot of fun. This man has so many interesting just stories and philosophies and just experiences in the RPG community, and I'm just looking forward to hanging out with him. First, but before we do that, let's go over some quick business, some basic channel stuff. First and foremost, guys, welcome in the chat. If you have not already, please hit that retweet link. Dice Thulu has it for you right there. Tell all your friends that you're hanging out with us and you're having a good time. And it is going to be fun. Second, of course, just a couple of quick announcements about things that are going on. I've announced this in Discord, but of course, next weekend, next Saturday and Sunday, we're not going to be having any shows. We have normally Writhing Moon, the horror show, and then the DM's Table, which is our round table, and Mouse Guard, the Dark Spring. Those are all going to be canceled. Unfortunately, I'm going to be at PAX Unplugged, so I'm not going to be here, but hopefully you guys will see all of our excellent casts doing their own stream thing, and you guys can hang out with them. And I think Saving Throw Show is going to be on that weekend, so they probably will have some fantastic shows for you guys to check out as well. Other than that, this Wednesday we have episode 3, the finale of the Daubers miniseries, and that show has been received so fantastically well that we may have some really, really big announcements about it, which you guys are going to have to tune in to find out. But it has been a trip. Playing Fern the Rat in that whimsical fantasy universe where we may be the bad guys. I don't know. Hopefully you guys will tune in for that. That's Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, the finale of that miniseries. Other than that, I was going to talk about the show we just announced, but I'll talk about it at the end. What I do want to talk about is, if you guys have not already, definitely hit that link for the giveaway that we're doing for November. We are currently running our Pathfinder book giveaway. Dice Thulu, once again, will have the link for you there. We are giving away a Pathfinder hardcover core rulebook, an adventurer's guide, and a bestiary box. It's got a ton of little paper minis with high quality art on them, and because we hit so many social media shares and retweets and all that stuff, I decided to throw in a bunch of those WizKids HD primed minis, because they sent me some, and I'm like, you guys can have them. So all of that good stuff, that's going to be going out at the end of the month. Make sure you get in. It's free to enter, of course. If you're already following here on Twitch and on Twitter, you have entries, so go claim them. Go do it. You might win. Spoon. I don't know what that means, but spoon. That's pretty much it. That's all.
I believe that's a tick.
Oh, I was like, I feel like I should understand the reference, but I also haven't actually seen the new Tick show. I did watch the cartoon when I was a kid.
I love the cartoon. I
Yeah.
think the cartoon show is probably the best incarnation out of all the animated versions or all the action versions that aren't the comic book. I love the original animated version is the best. We started watching the latest one, and we haven't gotten all the way through it. It's clearly doing something very different, but it's interesting. Yeah, and I just have a soft spot for the one that Fox did with Patrick Warburton is brilliant. I would watch him eat cereal. So yeah,
Shame on me for not knowing. Look, it's been a long time since I saw that show. Okay, it has been. There have been other shows between then and now.
I had a moment here in Los Angeles where I was at a commercial audition, and the guy who played Arthur in the original live action series was auditioning for the same thing I was. And normally I try to just kind of like people do whatever they do, and we don't have to have big Hollywood moments. But I was like, dude, I love that show. I have it on DVD. I'm always sad when it didn't get renewed. And he was like, you and me both.
I feel like I would be like that a lot in LA.
Yeah, you can be like that, but then you rapidly kind of learn like
you get over it.
You don't get over it. It's a level of professional courtesy that you learn to extend to everybody else. That we're
fair enough.
Ultimately, unless somebody's like a mega celebrity, we're ultimately all just people who are trying to scratch out our living, however we do it, and we're all at different points in our journey. So you don't. I try not to fanboy too hard over people that I meet, and sometimes there was a guy who I'm not going to bother to name, but he was a big improv guy that I loved. And I randomly ran into him at a bar, and he was there with his phone, like he was clearly messaging somebody or something like that. And I couldn't help myself, and I walked over and I was like, "Hey, I just want to say that you've been a real inspiration to me, and I really appreciate like all the places that you've gone with your career." And he was just like, "Thanks, man. Thanks, appreciate it."
That's
I get it. Like I was intruding on his personal time, right?
Yeah.
And he clearly was in his phone, like, I'm in my zone. But that's what you learn is like, okay, well, if they're not in entertainment hosting mode, you don't need to.
I had that experience where I've had that experience a couple times because I just started going to, like, I used to go to New York City Comic Con all the time, right? Because it's local, and I used to say hi to all the people there, like, fanboy about some of the artists, whatever. But I started going to like conventions like PAX and TwitchCon and stuff now. And it's like, it's a little bit more, there's a little less of a barrier between you and like the people there. And so like, it's hard for me to like bump into, I was at PAX East the first time, and I was talking to my friend, and I literally turned around and Jerry Holkins runs like right into me. And I'm like, I said hi to him, and we had already been talking a little bit, but I wanted to stop and like talk to him and be like, hey man, you're in. And he's like, no, he's got to get somewhere. Like, let the guy go.
Yeah. Well, and I mean that's a weird level of like, there's nerd fandom, which is kind of like, honestly, game designers and artists and whatnot aren't really used to that level of. Most of them aren't used to like a level of celebrity, so they themselves, I know from talking to them, that like they have a hard time navigating that space because they're not used to it the way, like, if you lived in LA and you're on a TV show, like you're used to people like just like recognizing you on the street, but then having weird interactions with you. But you learn to deal with that, right? Whereas if you're a game designer, you only get approached at conventions, and then it's kind of like, also you're trying to do business, so it's that double-edged sword. Whereas if I was somebody from the Big Bang Theory and I was at a big fan convention, like I would probably have a handler with me, but on top of it, like I know I'm in appearance mode and I'm there to make an appearance. And I'm not there to like go and figure out like, okay, can I get you to freelance on this book that I'm putting together that's going to be next year, and we're doing a Kickstarter, and here's the pitch, and like it's different. So it's a different thing. But yeah. I mean, that's just the way it is in LA. It's like it's a business town, and like let's all be in the business together.
I didn't even think of this when we were talking about doing the show, but I figure you might be one of the people to pitch my theory to, because it's been developing and like it definitely carries water now. I used to think that it was a secret Hollywood D&D cabal, but I'm almost positive that it exists now.
I mean, I guess so. I mean, I think somebody over at Critical Role might be better able to answer that. I just think that I think there was a secret D&D cabal, but if there is, I'm not involved with it enough, right? Like, and also I just think that Dungeons and Dragons has become so mainstream that it was
Yeah.
always there. It's just now instead of it being a secret D&D cabal, it's
Yeah, no, that's like, bear in mind I was formulating this theory before you had like the, Joe Manganiello and his, friends tweeting out pictures of their game room and stuff, right? That was a thing that
yeah,
did not come out of Hollywood until
right.
literally like this year.
Well, yeah, and that's, I mean, there's, for one thing, it's an extremely, I don't know, I think people like make a big deal of like how like, oh, this is a nerdy subset of pop culture, and the truth is like Dungeons and Dragons is one of the most recognized brands
Yeah.
in the United States, right? Like when Hasbro bought Wizards of the Coast, yeah, they were buying a role playing game, but really they were buying a name called Dungeons and Dragons. And
Mm-hmm.
if you say that to somebody, it's kind of like saying like, "Oh, look at how nerdy Star Wars is." Like Star Wars is not nerdy. There's literally 7 billion
Yeah,
people
fair enough.
who have all seen the movie and all love it and can engage with it on some level, right? So it's just that Dungeons and Dragons has finally, so in the 80s we had the satanic panic kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of like there was this whole generation of moms and dads who were like, I don't know what this is about, including like my parents, right? Like my entry into Dungeons and Dragons was not Dungeons and Dragons, it was Star Frontiers, because my parents were like, oh, we have a friend and their son is really into Dungeons and Dragons, and I don't know about that, he's really obsessed with it, and it seems like we're not sure, we have questions about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, what about this thing called Star Frontiers, which was essentially the same thing, same different box, prettier, no, flaming efreet on the cover, but it was. And they're like, oh, you like Star Wars, you like science fiction stuff, yeah, we'll get you this game. Well, then, it was literally 2 months later I was playing D&D. But yeah, so you had this generation of people who most of their parents didn't know what it was, didn't understand, and had heard bad things kind of like secondhand through the press.
Mm-hmm.
And then the kids who played it grew up and
Yeah.
had kids, And so if you look at things as like a cultural wave of influence, people who are in their 40s and 50s have now worked their way through the ranks of media and Hollywood, so that they're actually the tastemakers and the influencers, and they can decide what's on a particular show. If you ever watched How I Met Your Mother, it was like that was clearly written by people who were born in like 1970 or 1975, right? It was all like a bunch of throwback 80s jokes
Mm-hmm.
repackaged, for 2005, 2006. And you could see the people who were in their early 30s now like expressing their cultural currency and putting their fingers into the culture and saying, this was our shared experience, let's celebrate it. And now those people are actually the showrunners, and they have people who are 35,
And
or whatever.
And it's also, I mean, I guess it probably, like, I don't want to say it's a new thing, because I guess, that was where Star Wars and all those things in the 70s, they came from essentially like nerds who were making, their own films and stuff like that. It's just, but it's interesting. Like there are so many people I know that are out in, in LA or Seattle right now doing like working on like role playing themed or related or adjacent like web series and shows and stuff. That they're going to be the next people that are making, the major media, right?
Maybe.
Well, I mean, statistically, so one of them is probably going to make something, right? And so it's interesting to see like that sort of lineage, and where, so like I don't know, like I'm endlessly fascinated by the subject of sort of where role-playing games and everything sort of adjacent to them both began, and how they're kind of working their way through society, mostly because I love I'm in love with and terrified by the idea that, like, just like esports went huge with money and all that, like D&D is probably going to be the next thing that's going to be taken to like, and what with like Legendary Pictures and stuff buying Geek and Sundry, and people putting money like I was talking to Ivan Van Norman last week about his Dread series, and how he's using that to essentially bridge the gap between like internet role playing and edited and produced television, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm super interested to see like where like what what is it that's going to break through and sort of make it into the mainstream that is essentially carrying what we do, creating role-playing entertainment into everyone's home.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple different points to it to touch on here. One is which I don't think it's a surprise that you're seeing a bunch of people in Seattle and Los Angeles stream, because we have a ready supply of talent and equipment and know-how to put together a cast of 6 compelling people who are interesting and funny and natural on camera, and to put together essentially a compelling product, right? But that doesn't mean that we're the only place. It's just like it's a natural effect of the gravity of having all of these, having nerd culture being ascendant, and then having all of these entertainment people in one place. Kind of there's an intersection there, which creates all of this production going on in those places. Like Seattle, obviously, it's because you have so many kind of like so many nerd influences converging there. But the flip side of that is I look at the Adventure Zone, and it's not a stream, but it is wildly popular and has a huge amount of influence. And those guys don't live anywhere. In fact, they left LA, right? Travis was here and moved away because for his own reasons, whatever his reasons are, I don't care. Like that's not salient to the point.
Right.
The point is they do a podcast and they're not really geographically connected at all. There's some of them, on the East Coast and some of them Ohio and Austin and all that kind of stuff. So they're able to put together a really interesting, compelling, and successful story and stream that is obviously in podcast format, but does not involve them being geographically in the same room. So I think that's interesting. I don't know, honestly, like when you say I'm curious what's going to go mainstream, I don't know that there is such a thing as mainstream anymore.
That's probably right, because I mean TV in a large way is kind of fighting the I guess new media.
Well, I think what you're seeing is it's not just necessarily new media. It really traces its roots back to the rise of cable television, where you saw the debut of The Sopranos, and all of a sudden cable TV could put on this incredibly interesting and adult storytelling thing that was this like long form serial story format that the networks were not able to attack. And then you started to see things get sliced with reality TV and and all of these cable channels, where you've got 100 different cable channels, and History Channel does one thing and Discovery Channel does another thing, and ESPN serves its own purpose. But mainstream is not so much like we all watch the big 3 networks and we all watch the Cosby Show and we watch the Simpsons and we watch whatever those 3 channels are. Like that was the mainstream, and that existed for 40 or 50 years. But I feel like now it's all everybody's playing the game for niche marketing, and maybe something will cross over and break out. So you see Game of Thrones become this breakaway hit that people who are not necessarily into fantasy watch. But I would argue you can't have Game of Thrones unless you have the Lord of the Rings movies.
Right? No, absolutely.
$80 gajillion and win a bunch of Oscars when Return of the King came out. So it's all kind of interconnected. I don't know where D&D goes next and how it intersects with the culture, but we've seen D&D featured on The Big Bang Theory, and they made a D&D. They've made several D&D movies. They're making a new one. But I would argue that it is as mainstream as it's going to get, and I don't know. It's just that people are recognizing it and using it as a touchstone now that it comes up in Stranger Things. It is not an accident, right? Like,
no, absolutely. I'm, again, I don't. I guess in the same way that The Punisher is gonna come out this weekend, right? And everyone is gonna watch it. Like literally everyone is gonna watch it, right? And I'm just fascinated to see who creating content specifically about role playing games is gonna hit it like that,
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, I don't think there's going to be like an A to B line because, to
Mm-hmm.
be honest, like role playing games are a form of interactive storytelling, and they involve a lot of the same skills that you would apply to being a writer
Mm-hmm.
on a show, just in a lot looser and more dynamic format rather than being able to plot out what each of the characters are going to do and how they might respond in a given moment. You have to be able to respond to what the players actually do in a given moment, right? But you still want to have that inciting intimate, inciting incidents. You want to
Mm-hmm.
have a rise of dramatic action and investigation and exploration, and then you want it to peak to some sort of giant climax, whether that's a fight or a reveal to the mystery or whatever it is. And then you have some denouement, and ultimately you want those things to be entangled so that it forms kind of this serial storytelling experience. But all of those skills directly transfer over to, you know, whether you're writing TV or movies or what have you. You still have to understand
Mm-hmm.
that what both of those things share is that they're both trying to create an interesting and memorable moment, and they're trying to arrive at some sort of revelation. And it's just that D&D and RPGs get there in response to what the players do, and in whether it's novel writing or television or film, you're putting the building blocks in place and hoping that the audience follows you along on the journey.
Right.
Whereas in tabletop, the audience is the journey, right?
Um, so that I mean that whole I guess discussion aside, I'm like
It's getting
no, I
deep.
know I don't want to. We could delve that rabbit hole forever, and it's interesting to me, but I don't want to like want to excavate the whole mine tonight. But I've been really interested in talking mostly because I've been fascinated by the work that you've been doing online, both with Saving Throw Show and I guess just in general. Tell me a little bit about where where you come from as a gamer, and sort of especially interested where the whole the whole dungeon bastard character came in, and everything
Sure.
you've been doing there.
Well, so I guess I would be technically. No, I'm not technically. Well, it depends on how you slice the pie, but I guess I come out of the old grognard tradition of like AD&D was my first game. I'm not like one of those old school white box guys, but
Hmm.
I started with AD&D, and I up until this year I had attended every Gen Con since Gen Con 18. So this was the first year that I'd missed in over 30 years. So I'm a longtime gamer. I've gamed AD&D, gamed second edition, I gamed third edition. I played an entire campaign in fourth edition.
Did you ever shake Gary Gygax's hand? I don't know. I feel like that should
I,
be that's like an old an old school gamer.
yeah, I mean, I remember running into him at Gen Con and things like that, or seeing him in the hallways and stuff. I'm from Minnesota, so it's always kind of like keep that polite distance.
Right. Yeah.
Let him do his thing, and oh, hey, that's Gary. How about that? I never really, I really appreciate what he brought to the hobby and that sort of thing, but I don't have any like cool Gary stories to share. Honestly, if there's one thing that sort of uh, really catalyzed my involvement in the community, it's that I really admire and appreciate the work that Monty Cook does.
Hmm. Oh yeah,
Um,
Monty's a fantastic guy.
Yeah. So I became a moderator on his forums back when he was running Mount Havoc Press during the .x days,
Hmm.
and I actually was involved with his Arcana Unearthed product that he put out and all that. I've been involved in the stuff that he's done going way back to 2001 or whatever it was. It all started honestly with Return to the Temple of Elemental Evil. Like I started running that adventure, and I stumbled upon his web forums, and there was a group of DMs there, and we were all one giant hive mind, and we were all working on, it's a mega adventure. It's like
Hmm.
128
Yeah, yeah.
pages or whatever
It's
it is,
big.
or
I've tried to run it before.
yeah, 128. And so we would have campaign reports, campaign logs, but we would also like brainstorm like, hey, so what do it seems like Hedrak could just like walk in and basically within 3 rounds annihilate my party. Why isn't he doing that? And a bunch of us would then all brainstorm like, okay, well, number one, are the PCs on his radar? Number two, does he have somebody else that he can dispatch who's lesser powered? Does he even know how powerful they are? Does he even care? And number three, the guy's insane, right? So he's like, maybe he's getting weird missives, or there's some other reason. Like you can, like we would basically help make the adventure the best possible experience for that DM and their party, as opposed to like, let's all sharpen the knives and like murder as many PCs as we could. And I personally really appreciated having that experience of like, let's give back to each other and let's share ideas and make the best possible play experience, as opposed to let's screw the players and really put our thumb down on top of them. And it's easy to run that adventure, especially that adventure, in really kind of a hardcore meat grinder kind of fashion. So I was involved with that for, you know, kind of as long as until about 2006, right? And he was shutting down Mal Havoc at that point, and also I was moving to Los Angeles at that point, right? But you know, you asked about where the Dungeon Bastard comes from. He sent me an email when I said I was moving to LA, and he was like, "Listen, I know you're off doing this whole new thing. Congrats, good for you. I don't know whether this will help you at all or not, but I know this person named Cindy Rice. She used to work at Wizards, and now she's out in Los Angeles, and she's a producer, and she's also a nerd. And I don't know if there's anything for you guys to do together, but you should at least meet, right?" And so we met, and Cindy's great. I love her. And she's been involved in everything. She was involved in the D&D movie back in the day, and I got to hear stories about that and whatnot. But the point being, like, eventually she wanted her production company, the production company called Epic Level, which she and her producing partner were involved in. She was like,
they
we want to
produce the Gamers series, I believe.
Yes. Yeah. They're involved in the Gamer series. Yeah. The kind of some of the sequels and whatnot. I think they did this either the second or third.
I know they did the second because I've watched that like 50 times.
Right. So at any rate, they were involved in a bunch of different like nerd properties and whatnot. And she said at some point, she was like, I had been kind of pitching her ideas, like, you know, back in 2012, there was that whole like the Mayan apocalypse thing that was sort of playing out. So like, and I was like, oh, what if we did a web series that was just sort of like a countdown to the Mayan apocalypse? Like every week we would have a check-in on how kind of our crazy characters in the basement are getting ready for the Mayan apocalypse, which clearly is not going to happen, but you know, it's sort of the premise for the, you know, it's the format for the show. We talked about stuff like that. At any rate, she emailed me out of the blue one day and said, hey, I've got this new camera and I want to take it for a test run. Do you have something that you have something like a little 2 or 3 minute script that you want to try and shoot, and I'll shoot it for free and we'll make it work. And I had been working on this sketch that was an acting coach. And kind of the satirical premise was that he was this blowhard acting coach, and it was a mobile acting coaching service, right? So the idea was that you would come and pick him up, and he would give you acting lessons in your car as you drove around LA. And honestly,
sounds like something that already exists.
You would think so. It probably does in
I wouldn't
some
be surprised.
demented place. But the point being that you would very quickly figure out, or at least the audience would very quickly figure out, that he's just using the actors to drive him around and do his errands, you know? But he had all this high-minded kind of justification of, you know, if you can't do your lines in front of the dry cleaner, you certainly can't do them in front of a camera and things like that. It's an okay. I don't know that it's more than a sketch, but it was a funny premise. Anyway, she said, do you have something that you want to do? And of course, when a producer says, do you have a script that we can shoot, the first thing you say is yes, and then either you have it or you don't.
Then you write one.
So I took that idea and I said to myself, what could I do that would be more in line with what Epic Level, you know, what their bent is, what that would be more of a nerd kind of, you know, RPG tabletop kind of angle on it. And that's how I came up with Bill Cavalier, the adventure coach. So instead of an acting coach, he's an adventure coach. And the satirical premise is he's teaching you the correct way to play Dungeons and Dragons, which, of course, there is no correct way to play Dungeons and Dragons, to be honest. I mean, the bottom line is if you're having fun, you're playing Dungeons and Dragons the correct way. So that's the origin of Bill Cavalier, the Dungeon Bastard, and I don't remember how many episodes we did. I mean, we did a bunch of stuff. We did a Kickstarter, and I hosted the Ennies, and I was a guest of honor at Gen Con and did coverage for them of what was going on at the con, and it was fun and it was exciting. It was a lot of work, and it ends up being kind of expensive too, right? Because the format of that show is very, it's very, there's a lot of Stephen Colbert influence in that too, in terms of like the word where the Dungeon Bastard is preaching, and then there's this stuff that slides in on the side that is constantly undercutting everything that he's saying and making fun of what a buffoon the guy is, right? And so not only would I write the scripts of whatever rant or whatever topic I was going to address, but then after we were done shooting, we could shoot like 12 of those in a weekend or whatever. That was easy. But after we were done, then every week it was sit down and look at the rough cut and then give notes to the editor of like, okay, at this point, these things slide in, and then this next thing slides in, this, and then he would do a rough cut of it. And I didn't have any of that stuff written out ahead of time, right? So all the stuff, if you ever watch an episode that you see sliding in on the side, unless it was a script specifically for Gen Con, that stuff was always written, spontaneously the week that the edit was being done. So I would have the basic rant or the basic topic scripted out, and I would have some of the action and special effects, visualized in my mind so that we could shoot it properly. But in terms of all the stuff on the sideboard that would fly in, that was all then put in, that was all written in post after I saw kind of what the flow was, what the language was, like then where are the gaps? Because the brilliant thing about that format, which is not original to me in any way, shape, or form, is that you've got one guy being funny here, but when he's not being funny, you've got something funny happening over here talking about how unfunny this guy is. So at any rate, it was a lot of work because you couldn't just tell the editor, okay, go cut all 12 episodes and it's good. He had to like do a rough cut, and then I would do a pass on it. Then he would do his editing pass, and then I would come back and go, this needs to be, honestly, it needs to be the half a second earlier. When I start to say the word bugbear, that's when this thing needs to come in. It needs to land on, like, I would literally orchestrate it like a piece of music. This needs to land on the word, whatever it was. And so it ended up being kind of more money than the production company ended up dissolving, and that's kind of where Dungeon Bastard sort of got like left in terms of producing videos, because I don't have the funds to fund a new round of videos. And then on top of it, like when we entered into the agreement to like, actually we did one test video, and then we decided to actually make it a web series. And when we entered into that agreement, that's when we started sharing the rights on it. So the rights are a little bit tied up right now. They're not 100% mine. And so all of that stuff needs to be unsnangled before we could go forward and do something different with the property, which I plan on doing. And I don't think it's going to be a huge hassle to iron that stuff out, but I
just wanted to talk about it mostly because I forget exactly when I found it, but it was just some really, really entertaining comedy and stuff related to D&D before I found a whole bunch of the web series, the people making web series and stuff in the D&D world that I know now, and also before I even knew that there was a such thing as streaming D&D.
Yeah, I mean it was. I'm certainly proud of the work that I did with it, and I'm. It was deliberately written to be like cheaper than a full-on gamer's style of production, and that was the space that I wanted it to live in. That's fine, and I enjoy the character. I think like any piece of satire, you run the risk of crossing over into becoming the thing that you're making fun of, and sometimes I feel like the honest truth of the situation is I've built this audience of geeks that follow me on my Dungeon Bastard account, but when I launched the account, it was 100% in character and 100% kind of over the top satirical goofball stuff. And as we got deeper and deeper into the series and then beyond the series, it has changed to be actual. It's what's funny to me is it started off as this like haha satirical adventure coach, and then just 2 weeks ago at GameholeCon, I literally ran a hands-on DM workshop where I had DMs sitting around the table creating encounters that we ran and played through. And then I gave them advice on, okay, well, I think you're missing some opportunities here, and I liked what you did with this piece of it, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I'm actually adventure coaching people at this point.
By the way, that sounds fantastic. Like, that sounds like an awesome time.
It's a really interesting experience, and one of the reasons that I decided to put that together, even though it was somewhat involved, kind of like conceptually to get my head around it and produce the materials for it, is I think if there's an issue in the growth of our hobby, it's that we don't have enough DMs, right? So there's any number of people who want to play, but there's a ton of people who are either intimidated about DMing, or they're DMing and they're doing a bad job, which is not, that like that. I think the number one issue for anyone is scheduling, in terms of keeping a group together. But then number two is like, do you click with the other players, and does what the DM want to do, is that compelling?
It's so weird because like I remember when I started DMing, it was literally because I was playing with a group, and the DM was doing a bunch of things that kind of annoyed me. And I'm like, man, I could do better than this, right?
Yeah.
But but other than that, there was no one to like tell me like what a good habit or a bad habit when it came to DMing was, and you have to kind of work through all those, and and figure out and go through groups where your players aren't enjoying the sessions and stuff before you finally become decent.
The biggest obstacle to playing D&D is that you have to learn it by playing it, and that especially applies to DMing. And you can learn to play D&D from watching Critical Role or watching something on Saving Throw or what have you. Like, you can learn how to play a game through actual plays now, which is great, but it's hard to learn actual practical GM skills, because you never get to hear what's going on in a DM's head during the stream.
Right. And also, I mean, again, I look at it the same way as I look at, for example, I'm sure you would agree that, like, I can go and watch someone act in a movie, but that doesn't teach me how to act, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like DMing is exactly the same way. Like, I can see what a great DM looks like, but I have no idea what steps, what I am lacking that would put me there. And that's actually why, I mean, we recently started this thing that we do on Sundays, the round table, where it's literally just, we have a Discord for all of like the Twitch D&D DMs. And just, we get together specifically. I do this show because this is a kind of a mixed bag of DM, questions and talking and hanging out. But I wanted to do more educating, and so that I use that show, the roundtable, to specifically talk to DMs and be like, what did you do that's working or didn't work? What do you want to improve next session? Like, what, tell me things about your game that you're experimenting with, or you want to work on, or you tried and just failed miserably at, like. Because we never talk about those things, and talking about those and analyzing them is, for me, the best tool for a DM to... Self-critique is essential for a DM, I think.
Right.
But no one tells DMs that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think most of us have that, like, self-critiquing voice in our head, but that's a one-way journey, right? Like, then you're just kind of spiraling around your own navel going, well, what do I do? What do I do? Like, honestly, like, some of the best GMing breakthroughs I've had is discussing what's going to happen in a game, or what happened in a game with my wife in the car on the way there or the way back or whatever, right? I mean, that's a very basic piece of it, is to get outside your own frame of reference. But I do the same thing on Saving Throw Show, right? On Tuesdays, I have a prep stream that I do for an hour and talk about what's coming up and kind of what my thought process is approaching the session. On Wednesday night from 8 to 11 Pacific time, we actually run the game and everybody can watch that get played out. And then on Thursdays, I have a recap show for an hour where I talk about, okay, well, this didn't play out the way I thought it was. This was a great moment. These were some missed opportunities that I wish I would have included. I might have handled this differently. I was really happy with the way these elements worked, etc. So on the one hand, you can actually get into my DM brain and go, okay, well, what were the decisions that he was making in the moment, or not necessarily in the moment, but in hindsight, prior to and in hindsight. And the other piece of it that goes back to my roots in the community is we've got our regular fans in chat, and they contribute ideas, and they share their perceptions of what was going on in the moments that they loved or what they felt was weird or janky or whatever. And the good news is we don't have, the good news and the bad news is we don't have 20,000 people who are all trying to get their chat on at the same time, right? So it still feels like a very comfortable, homey community where we can have a discussion about how the game is shaping up,
right?
And actually, chat can have a direct influence on how the story plays out, as opposed to the downside to watching Critical Role is you almost have to turn the chat off because it's intolerable,
right?
What happened.
Critical Role was made infinitely better by watching it in other people's channels. Right?
Yeah.
Where you could actually talk to your friends and stuff.
Yeah.
But I definitely agree. Also, that's actually, we mentioned this before the stream, but I wanted to talk a little bit about that, mostly because, you, when you do the prep stream and so, like, the recap stream, is something I've been considering doing, and I will probably, mostly because I have no free time, so I will probably find a way to do it as, like, a Patreon reward or something. But the prep stream, like, mostly I wanted to talk to you about how you've found it to work, found the reception to it, and found that it affects your game not just at the table but also with the viewers of both the prep and the game. Mostly because I don't do any prep anymore. Like, I don't prep for sessions at all, and it's something I wish I had. Like, I know I should spend more time doing, but.
Are you playing D&D, or what system are you playing?
Right now, I DM. Let's see. Wednesdays I play D&D. Thursdays I'm going to be DMing D&D 5th edition. Fridays I DM Pathfinder. Saturdays I DM Open Legend. And then Sundays I play Mouse Guard.
Right.
So
yeah, you've got a lot going on. But how do you get away with that? Are you playing pre-published adventures?
No, well, I'm playing. Are
you running pre-published adventures?
No, not really. So, for example, when we start our Thursday game, that's gonna be Razor Coast, which is a published setting. And a kind of like a campaign guide that consists of like a bunch of different encounters and set pieces and stuff, but it's not written. You have to kind of write it yourself. Okay. And then Fridays I'm running Curse of the Crimson Throne, but that's so far off the rails that it's not remotely what it in the book anymore. And then Saturdays is entirely homebrew.
Okay.
The way
you don't do any prep on any of these games?
The way I get away with not prepping is I usually kind of jot down a bunch of notes, like about an hour or so before the game, and then I know generally where I want things to go. And you were talking before about keeping your session to like the beats, like you're doing like a TV show. That's generally how I keep things in mind, but it's a lot of improv and a lot of just, I kind of know what should be happening, and mostly I kind of try and know the world enough so the players can do basically whatever they want, and as long as those pillars that control the world are shaping the results, then it should fit. Things should make sense.
Right.
But that's basically, it's like I kind of just fly by the seat of my pants a lot.
Yeah, that's fine.
But I'm interested in your opinion. Like, I'm not saying that's better. I'm actually interested in how you found the prep streams go, both in your own running of the game, and also, again, I mentioned this off stream, but with the whole audience thing.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I don't mean to like diss what you're doing.
No. I understand.
I'm very much an improvisational DM myself, so
right.
I appreciate it. I'm just curious, like, what your approach is to it, because that's a lot of those are a lot of different sessions to try and keep track of, and to jump into each one seems like a fresh dive into the cool, crisp November pool there. So. So I was just curious what your approach was to make it manageable for yourself and to provide a good experience for your players. I don't have any problem running my prep stream because I won't, like, I don't. Well, okay. So first of all,
Mm-hmm.
like my players, I have their own lives and are busy and generally don't have time to watch the prep stream.
Oh
So
no, no, I'm not talking about the players. I'm talking about the audience.
yeah, it came up, like, I don't know if it was on my Twitter feed or somebody else had asked me, like, oh, aren't you worried about, yeah, somebody on my Twitter feed had asked,
Oh
aren't you
yeah,
worried
about your
about
players
your
watching.
players
No,
watching?
I
And I'm
wouldn't
like,
be.
and I have been concerned about that before, but not with this group, because
Yeah.
they all know that it would ruin the game for them if they did, and they don't need to because they got a bunch of other stuff going on. But in terms of like, most of the stuff, as I pointed out earlier, D&D is it's a dance, right, between the DM and the players,
Mhm.
and you put out information and they process it and respond and then give you a reaction in kind, so that eventually you're sort of doing this, I don't know, whatever kind of dance steps, is the style of your game, whether it's rock and roll or salsa or whatever,
Mhm.
if you want to use that metaphor. But the point being that even if they bought the adventure and said, oh, okay, at the end of this, we're going to confront Strahd and have to kill him, all of the steps that we're taking in order to even get to that point are so fluid and are so spontaneously orchestrated that I don't think the audience would lose a huge element of surprise, right? And so part of it is just that we're running adventures that have been published,
Mhm.
right? So Ironkeep Chronicles, which is the campaign that I run on Wednesdays on Saving Throw, has through the life of the campaign I've all run published adventures.
The Yawning Portal stuff, right?
So we started with Sunless Citadel, and then we moved into White Plume Mountain, and now we're running an old organized play adventure called Stage Misdirections, and the next thing we're tackling is Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. So these are all well-trodden fan favorites. Like anybody who's watching can certainly have either has access to spoilers in the book right there, or they played it 20 years ago and they remember how it was supposed to go, etc.
Right.
But the fun is not going, okay, well, what happens when they get the purple key card? The fun is, how is this going to play out in this moment? And also, I think there's a huge entertainment element involved in the characters at the table role playing with each other, and then also me as the DM exploring the relationships with them through NPCs or what have you, right? So the real fun of the session is not the plot itself.
Mm-hmm.
The fun of the session is all the other stuff that kind of hangs. Let's be honest, like a basic D&D plot is not some sort of super brilliant revelation.
Right.
It is, let's go in the dungeon and kill the monster. And I think that's one of the things, honestly, that is the biggest challenge to D&D in its modern incarnation, is that when it was first started, that was the whole plot, was go in the dungeon and kill the goblins and take their stuff.
We actually we actually talked about this hugely on the last roundtable show, about how D&D stands in such, I think these days stands in such stark contrast to all of the other games that place so much emphasis on like character beliefs and growth and stuff, like Burning Wheel and Apocalypse World and things like that, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And D&D is just kind of not designed for that.
No, right. It can't. I think to some degree they experimented with like breaking D&D off from its roots with 4th edition, and I don't think that was a successful move for them, right? So I think the main what's the best way to put this? So So D&D's greatest asset and its greatest weakness, to apply a cliche, is that it was first on the scene, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so back when I was learning Dungeons and Dragons, there was no Twitch stream to watch. There was no, there were no videos about it or anything like that. And in fact, there wasn't an internet when I started learning it. So the only way to learn how to play Dungeons and Dragons was not to read the book, because the book, if you ever try and read through the DM's guide, it meanders all over the place. It contains some really weird advice about how to run a game, and it's filled with a bunch of subsystems which might be within and of themselves somewhat coherent, but when you put them next to each other, it's like, why does this roll a d20 and this is percentile dice?
Yeah.
Even if you look at the old AD&D Player's Handbook, where it's like every stat goes from 3 to 18, except strength, because if you're a fighter, you roll percentile dice to see how strong you are, and that goes up by percentile dice until you get to 19, and then it picks back up again. It goes 19, 20, 20, 21, 22, up to a max of 25 or whatever. Is like the amount of effort you had to put into the game in order to learn it was not insignificant. It was not something that you could just play in an afternoon. And so I and my peers spent countless hours during the summer, on the weekends, and during the school year, et cetera, so learning and playing and exploring and discovering like the joyful moments in this game. But your investment in achieving system mastery was so, became such a precious thing because it was so onerous that if Dungeons and Dragons would come out and go, oh, okay, by the way, we're based on 3d6 now. We don't roll d20s. You max out at an 18. You roll 3 dice and you get an 18. There would be a massive revolt. Even though mechanically, like, who cares, right?
Yeah.
You're still getting a number, and yes, there's more of a bell curve to it, but like it's a number between 3 and 18. Like, what's so sacred about the d20? Because that's the way it was. That's the way I learned it, man. All of my memories, like I have all of this emotional investment in this system mastery thing that is super meaningful to me. I have a huge emotional attachment to it, right? And so to change it is incredibly difficult. And yeah, so that's why I say like the downside is D&D is sort of stuck in a particular framework where I know what magic missile does, and I know what a sleep spell does, and I know what a wizard is. And if you were to change any of those things in a significant way, I would go, that's not D&D anymore. I don't want to play.
Right.
Like that's a betrayal of the investment that I've made in your system. But the flip side of that is incredible consumer loyalty to the idea of Dungeons and Dragons, because you have all this, this nostalgia is weighing heavy on your shoulders, and it's something you can just literally like sniff off of a book.
Do you think that's, and this is kind of a side tangent, but do you think that's also why there's considerably less, I want to call it, I guess the word would be grognardism and like adherence to 5th edition? Like, 5th edition is still the most popular thing, but there's also, people are trying every other, all the other options for role-playing too, and not essentially leaving D&D to rot, right? Like, because there's not as much it's easier to get involved in and learn the rules and just start playing. You essentially have a little bit more freedom to experiment with other things too.
Well, my take on 5th edition is that they did a tremendous job of blending the old school AD&D experience with a new sensibility, right? With like I always used to say when 5th edition first came out, it really felt like somebody traveled back in time kind of to the end of AD&D, or maybe the end of 2nd edition, but really like the end of AD&D, and went, we know you're going to put a new edition out, but here I have brought these ideas from the future. Keep what you have that's working, but incorporate a few of these other things. And I think they've done a good job of dialing everything back so that your play experience is what you remember from sitting in your buddy's basement in the 80s and 90s, but with enough new kind of juice to it that you go, oh, okay, well, this is fun. The big issue that I had with 4th edition was not so much that they added all of these weird like encounter powers and daily powers.
I had no problem with those. Those were fine.
It did feel a little bit sort of like a fantasy superhero system, and the dirty truth of D&D is it largely is
Right, it is. It kind of is.
game, but we don't like to admit that. We all like to think that we're just hobbits on the way to Isengard or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But they sort of made that like plain on its face, which was okay. My big problem was from a design perspective. In my opinion, it seemed like every monster had like 4 cool things that it did, but it kind of had to work its way up to that 4th cool thing, right? So round 1 it would do this thing, and then round 2 it would do this thing, and round 3 it would do this thing, and then like on the 4th round it finally like it was bloodied, and when it was bloodied it triggered this power that was this daily power that it was this like big super smash kind of like World of Warcraft moment, for lack of a better idea, right? Of what to call it. And my problem was, in order for them to get 4 rounds deep in the combat, you had to give that monster like 300 hit points.
Right. That's actually that's my problem with Pathfinder right now. Is my players smash the hell out of everything before anything can do anything cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, give it a ton of hit points.
And then they shrunk down, like, you did a fireball that did like 3d6 worth of damage, and I'm like, that's not experience. Like, when I cast a fireball, I want to pick up a massive handful of dice, I want to throw them on the table, and I want everything to come to a grinding halt for 45 Well, we go. Yeah, there's 10
how many dice do we get?
30, 40. Yeah, exactly. But we laugh about that. But that is
you're right. Yeah, I understand.
Experience of rolling those dice is there's something ritualistic and magical about that. And when you change it from 10 die 6 to 3d6, you are literally diminishing the experience.
You may appreciate this. I mentioned this to Adam Coble. He did not like my opinion on it. I mentioned this to so many. I haven't said this on the show in a long time, but I actually because I started playing D&D in 3.5 when I was like 14. And then I stopped because I was playing. In that time, I was also playing Warhammer 40K, and I played a lot more of that than I did D&D. I only played D&D when I went to like summer camp.
Sure.
And then around high school, like later high school and college, I stopped because all of my friends moved away and I didn't know anyone to play D&D with, except I played a couple of games of 4th edition with, a friend. But when I came back from college, it was Roll20 that actually got me back into playing, right? Being able to play online. And that was what got me essentially into the DM's chair for the first time. And I have, a lot of people have mixed feelings about 4th edition, okay. I personally thought it was fine. I played it. I had fun with it. 4th edition, out of all of them, and I have tried all of them, is my favorite edition to run Tomb of Horrors in.
Okay.
I think it is the most fun you can have with the edition is to actually put it through its paces like that.
I mean, for as much as I've managed to paint myself as a grognard, I have to tell you that I have never played and I have never run Tomb of Horrors.
I need to fix that. Oh.
You never will be able to fix that. Don't put your hand in the giant green mouth. Okay, I got it. Like it's
that's
like
in the first room. That's the one thing. That's one thing. That's not the only thing.
All right.
I love the ambivalence.
It's like being the person who has not seen Star Wars. Like they've somehow gotten to age 30 and they haven't seen Star Wars. It's like everything that happens, or at least all the major things that happen without ever having to see the thing. And I won't be able to ever recapture that experience of seeing Star Wars for the first time. That's not already been tainted by
fair enough.
Surrounding culture, right? And the truth of the matter is, when I started gaming, the group that I got into had already been playing, so they had already played Tomb of Horrors and had no desire to replay it. And then I never had any desire to run it for any of the groups that I was playing because I was more interested in making my own stories and not so much interested in. And also, like, there's a certain time in your DM's career where that moment to run Tomb of Horrors appears, and how often do you find characters that are like 13th or 14th level that your players feel like they're disposable? Because that's the whole thing, right? You have to have these characters who are 12th, 13th, 14th level, but you can't be so attached to them that you're not willing to watch them die a horrible, instantaneous, agonizing death.
And that's why I would never use it in a campaign unless I hate, like, I wanted to also walk out the door and be like, peace on the way out. Like,
yeah. The ideal way to play that thing is at a convention with like disposable character sheets.
Right.
Kind of tear off and like, okay, let's start another one. But that's that's where I'm at, is that I never played it back in the day before it became this legend,
I
and I've never had. I just don't have a strong interest in it. It's
That's
not.
fine. There's just I think it might have been because I played it when I was like formative in my DMing career, but there's so much good advice on how to create a dungeon that misdirects and is like beatable. Like it tells you all of its rules up front, but
Yeah.
just it's all like it's all there, but it's also it's also kind of a riddle and a trap, and I don't know. Maybe I'm just sentimental. I just weird like that.
Look, and that's where all this stuff comes from, right? Is like there's the reason that they keep coming back to those touchstone moments in Dungeons and Dragons is the sentimentality,
Mhm.
like means something to you personally, and stirs an emotional pool that causes you to act, and I don't begrudge them that. Like that's part of the brand, that's part of the cultural cachet, right? And so for them to abandon that would be a
Yeah, no, yeah,
ridiculous
definitely.
party move. But let's not kid ourselves that like its greatest strength and its greatest weakness is the long, proud, involved history behind it.
Right. Yeah, my favorite thing like it's I guess it's harder to do these days now because like it was easy to do in that sort of fourth edition period and I guess early in fifth edition before they released Yawning Portal and it was in there and now anyone who has the book knows exactly what's in the Tomb of Horrors. But there was that point where like no one had the original copy and no one cared about 3.5, so it was like most people hadn't played it, and so you could actually find a group of like 4 to 6 people who had never played it but had only heard stories, and those were the best people to actually like throw through it.
Yeah, I mean, it depends upon the parameters of what your group is looking for. It's all a play style thing. But yeah, I hear what you're saying.
It's
It's something that I have never.
So I'm interested and we'll probably make this our last little kind of self topic before we dive into audience questions and stuff. But because I guess because of your sort of attitude there, what would you consider like your milieu as far as DMing? Like what kind of stuff are you most in your element when you're creating?
Hmm. Um. What am I most in my element? I guess I like to remix stuff, right? That's really my strongest suit, and
Mm-hmm.
that's really the place where I feel like my skills come to the fore. I I often get sort of analysis paralysis if I'm creating something from whole cloth,
Mm-hmm.
and I create my own world, and I start going down rabbit holes that just don't lead anywhere productive, and I kind of get overwhelmed by questions and details and choice of if it's a completely blank canvas. Like I don't like that. That's
You don't know
that's
where to
not.
start on the paper.
Well, yeah, and then also I just don't. I can't. I have a trouble staying focused enough to like kind of like, okay, that's fleshed out enough. Now I got to go over here.
Mm-hmm.
When I prep stuff for my own brainstorming purposes or whatever, I put everything on index cards because that way I don't have to like worry about sulling up a notebook where I have a random thought that occurs to me that I want to keep track of, but then what page do I flip to and where do I put there? Where do I put, like, I can't write in the margins. Like that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work for me. That's just not how my brain is organized. Maybe I'm
Right.
just too, OCD, but I like to work in sort of piecemeal, where if something comes up, I can write it down on a little note card over here and put it down there, and not worry about it. It's disposable, and I can either pick that idea up or put it away and throw it away later if it doesn't reveal itself to be something interesting and compelling. But what I've discovered over the course of running my games on Saving Throw and talking about my games on Saving Throw, because
Mm-hmm.
if you go back and look at Disorganized Play, which is my prep and recap, my DM centric show, I did a year of that without any of the game being streamed. I was actually running Storm King's
Right. I
Thunder
remember that. Yeah.
at my local game shop for a group of players there who are not streamers and not entertainers or involved in acting or the industry scene in a significant way, with a couple exceptions. But so I would talk about my game. There's 50 episodes of Disorganized Play about Storm King's Thunder, and what I've discovered is it's not so much that I feel like I have to be the creative mastermind and own everything, and these are all my chess pieces that I move around. I would rather take something that somebody like Chris Perkins has fleshed out to the best of their ability, given the constraints of the format, and then use that as sort of a diamond in the rough and polish and hone and change and respond and develop that into a really interesting, compelling storyline that follows its own path. That may not necessarily, that may bend back around and loop back around to where things conclude in the book, but has its own special meaning attached to it. So in terms of like my style as a DM, I'm definitely like, one of my buddies said, Tom's kind of he's more of an improvisational jazz DM. I like to have the phrases. I like to know what the instrumentation is. I like to know, okay, well, we're going to hand it off at some point and there'll be a drum solo, but I don't want everything fixed ahead of time, locked in, and I don't have to have 100% control. I like to be surprised in the moment and also issue surprises in the moment. And take advantage of those opportunities as they come up.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, mostly because when I started DMing seriously, like I started DMing in 4th edition and I tried to homebrew a world, and I didn't know how to homebrew a D&D world, so I was awful at it. Like, it was seriously the worst thing. And we played that campaign for a little while, and I just got tired of it being so bad, and I just gave it up. And then I moved to Pathfinder, because I think I had started playing Pathfinder, and I started DMing Pathfinder, and I discovered the Pathfinder Adventure Pass, and I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're 6 books, level 1 to 20, and it's an entire published campaign. And I started running them, and I was the first time through, like, Rise of the Rune Lords, I was such a slave to the book, because I didn't know what else to do, and I thought, if I just give out the experience and run the encounters that the book says, and, like, I remember the first time I ran Rise of the Rune Lords, my players wanted to go to Magnamar, and I'm like, right, but if you guys go there might be a part of the city that I kind of, like, have to wave you off from, because that's, like, later in the story, and because I essentially didn't know what to do, right? But I realized at some point the books need a lot of editing, right? Like, there are characters that don't make sense or come in too early or don't have enough development, and, scenes that could have more impact, and, things that should be played up. And I found that I'm much better reading through the thing and picking out those details that could have so much more impact and could play much better, and then just sort of fleshing that out and writing more content and expanding things. Essentially taking the framework, but editing it so it's something a lot more, I guess, that plays and is received a lot better. And I don't do that on stream anymore, but that's my home game. I've been doing that for a long time, and I have a lot of fun doing it. It's interesting, like, taking the published material and sort of analyzing and taking an editor's pen to it and seeing where you can kind of change things around and what you can substitute in. And
yeah, see, I would argue that actually the editors of RPG materials are some of the best editors out there. They have to have facility with so many different things, not just grammatical, but also rule structure, and they really do have to kind of see the overall plot and everything for what it is. That I think for a large part they do a tremendous job.
Right.
I think there's an issue there in that, number one, the fundamental format of a Dungeons and Dragons adventure has not significantly changed in 40 years. I mean, yes, there is, box text or not box text still kind of comes in and goes out of fashion, right? But if you look at a D&D adventure and go back to your 32-page module, it's still largely geographically tied to, here's a map.
Yeah.
And there's a key of encounters, and somehow they're numbered 1 to 25 or whatever it is. And then you will flip open your book and you will read encounter, whatever, like description 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? It has a geographic layout to it that is familiar to everyone as DMs, but is not actually conducive to doing your job as the DM. So you might get actually something helpful of, in this part of the adventure, the party travels to Ironslag, where they confront the fire giant king, who is busy assembling the pieces to the giant dodecahedron, which will unleash the fire elemental and blah blah blah, right?
Yeah.
Like you might get like literally like 2 paragraphs of what the actual intentions of the NPCs are and kind of the action beats that the party is expected to be involved in. But those will be abstract and will in no way, shape, or form be laid out for you in a specific fashion, right? So in order for you to create this experience of like rising kind of interest and building action and climax to either a big combat or a reveal, you as the DM have to like assemble what's going on in the moment with your players and how you're feeding them clues and things like that.
Right.
So I think one, the industry is sort of a slave to the structure that has come before, because I don't know that DMs how they'll respond to something radically different.
I mean, do you think there's a way to edit essentially a module to tell a story the way a DM essentially runs it?
Well, so I think that the real issue that's at the heart of the entire thing is no plan survives contact with the players, right? Mm-hmm. And yet, ostensibly, that's what an adventure writer's job is.
Right, it's to assume that they do exactly what you put in front of them.
Well, or you're trying to overwrite, so you're writing enough options or you're writing enough trapdoors so that if they go this way, but the plot goes this way, they fall through a trapdoor that takes them back over to here, and they pop up, and they feel that like it's a seamless, organic, whole. When in fact you've done this clever sleight of hand of like, oh, it turns out he peels the mask off and it's boom, boom, this NPC who pops up or whatever it is. So you're trying to navigate the flowchart of options, but ultimately you can't do that because you can't anticipate every single thing that the players are going to do. That's the DM's job. Like that's what makes this thing far more powerful than the World of Warcraft computer that can spit out combat stats and resolve, critical hits and all that kind of stuff, right? Is that I can, in fact, we talk a lot about like, oh, how do you improvise in when you're GMing or you're playing or whatever. And the truth is you're always improvising when you're running a game because you're always taking feedback from the players,
right?
You're reincorporating it into the structure of the game, and you're giving them a spontaneous, dynamic response that happens in that moment and that is unique to them. You are improvising when you run D&D. This is a question of like how much material do you have behind it? Do you feel like that you have to like that's your structure?
Right.
How compelled do you feel to hold true to that?
Right.
But the truth is like that's what separates you from a game like World of Warcraft or what have you, right? So that's the advantage that we have. Writing an adventure for that style of play or for that circumstance is difficult. I think there's a lot of experimentation going on. I'm a big fan of an adventure for Dungeon World called Servants of the Cinder Queen, and I don't think the format is unique to that adventure. But if you look at at Dungeon World adventures, they will lay out kind of like the story beats, and they sort of assume that you can run a combat where two fire giants show up, and you just need to know why they're there and what they want.
Right.
You don't need a huge stat block to get in the way, and you don't need a huge description of all of the various treasure and gear that they have. You're a DM with some facility, so just go do your job. And we're not gonna burden your brain with a bunch of information that needs to be kind of put together. There's a map in Servants of the Cinder Queen, but it's basically literally like, here's the village, here's some caves outside the village. The caves end up in this temple, and then and it's just like how the locations are physically connected.
Right.
There is almost no what you consider your standard D&D map of like room 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I've been reading, again, I mentioned this, I've been reading Razor Coast campaign guide, and it's a setting guide, but it calls itself a campaign guide in the sense that it's not a published adventure. It's what it is it's essentially it basically describes itself with like an inverted adventure pyramid. Like at the top level, the widest level, the players arrive in town and they can adventure here for a while, and then at higher level they get the I guess the circumstances start to narrow and narrow until like the players are kind of like funneled into the main event, and then even then to like the main boss of the campaign. But it doesn't tell you how to get there. It literally just says like, hey, what it suggests you do is it says, here are a bunch of like things that might be happening around town. Read a couple of them off as your players walk. Like, you're walking to the general store and you see some stuff happening in a back alley, or you see some people being dragged to market over here, right? And if your players pick up on one or seem interested, then you say, okay, and if they pick up on this, flip to this page and there's an encounter that goes with it. Boom, done. Throw that in there. That maybe one or two of those, and then you drop some information in, and that's your session, right? And then they leave it up to the DM essentially to figure out how to play those, flavor those, add the connective tissue, engage their players, deliver information, add NPCs, right? That's all because they assume that you can do that on your own.
Yeah. Yeah, and so sort of a loose framework like that is what I would like to see more, more products attempt. I don't know that sort of radical experimentation is going to take place outside of like the DM's Guild and kind of.
I don't think there's a huge demand for it in 5th edition right now, because it's one of those things I don't think people even know that they would like if they saw it.
Right.
You know, I don't know, man. But I have a lot of thoughts on adventure modules. Maybe we'll talk about them in the future. But man, we're getting on. Why don't we flip over to questions and topics? Because I know a bunch of our people in chat have been dropping some in anticipation, and I do want to make sure we get a chance to talk about these. But first of all, I want to pause and take a second to say, if you guys are hanging out with us in chat, welcome. Thank you guys for joining us. You guys are watching Fuzzy Dice, the Dungeon Master Show. My name is Askren, and I'm the host, and I'm hanging out with Tom LOMMEL right here. We have been going over all kinds of different topics. The way we're gonna jump right into to questions and stuff from the viewers. So guys, make sure you tag at Exploding Dice, or just put the word question before it in caps so I see it. And of course, if you have not already, please hit that retweet link. Tell your friends to come hang out and ask some D&D stuff. And we'll try and get through as many of these as we can. We got a little bit of time and a lot of questions, so let's see where we can get. Let's start with Short Manny 444 says, with all the changes to the ways we play D&D, what do you think would be the most surprising way we play in the future? Like, do you think there's going to be any major adjustments to role-playing games or D&D as a whole? I would say that Roll20 has been probably the biggest change to how we play D&D, like essentially decentralizing from being around a table. Yeah. I mean, I think that's huge. I think that's definitely got it's something that has become so easy and brainless, and we've been searching for that solution for so long. Like, I remember using Kloogeworks back in the day. Yeah. Oh, so many ways to try and play D&D online. And it was, I was trying to play with my buddies back in Minnesota, and it just kind of turned into like, okay, it was Java update of the week kind of thing. It was incredibly arcane and difficult to keep everybody synced up and all their characters synced up and all that kind of stuff. So I'm glad that we have finally sort of reached a platform that we can all standardize on and have that common experience around that's seamless and plays easier. I think I talked a little bit about this at one of my seminars at GameholeCon, and I think one thing that we have seen just from my long view perspective on the hobby is AD&D started off largely as a war game simulator of literally kicking the dungeon, the door to the dungeon, and kill the two kobolds, take their treasure, get some XP, go to the next room, kill the 4 kobolds, get some more treasure, get some more XP, level up, go kill the ogre, take his club, sell it in town. It was very much something that could be emulated, but emulated poorly
by
video games at the time.
At the time. And then video games really like started to blow away that experience in a way that was far more compelling and convenient than you could get by trying to get your 5 buddies to get around a table on a Saturday night.
Mm-hmm.
And now we've actually come around to the other side of it, to where if you want to have a World of Warcraft style, grind out XP experience, you can literally get that on your phone,
right?
And play it in a much more convenient, straightforward manner. Or you can play it on your computer and play World of Warcraft or whatever, and have that, and it's fun and it's its own thing. But now I feel like we've finally gotten back around to sort of like the next plateau, or the next stage of role-playing games, where it really is about story and consequences,
right? Absolutely,
interesting, compelling characters, and not quite so much about what loot did you get, how much XP do you have, that sort of thing. Like those sorts of psychological levers are still in place, where you still have that kind of like, oh, I can't wait to the next level.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a level in Bard or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So those things that's still supporting the impetus to the game. But I think that as we go forward, it's going to be even more about the crafting those cool moments of story and
right.
cool character than it is like, okay, I have a 16th level paladin, 4th level monk who has divine sun soul and can do these 5 attacks or whatever.
Right. I don't even hear people talking about like the loot they got or like the monster they slew or what level. Like I hear people talking about how much they love their characters and the the connections they have, and I think that's really, really, really like such an interesting evolution for the game.
I think my perspective is you're going to see D&D hopefully kind of push forward into a realm where there are more consequences attached to things that happen, rather than just sort of a binary system of either there's a success or there's literally like no result.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of smaller games, Burning Wheel, Apocalypse World. We talked about all these, things like D&D. Here's the thing for me: D&D has a section on 5th edition's character sheet for your beliefs, your ideals, your connections, your bonds, your flaws. But unlike a lot of other systems like Burning Wheel have those things too, except the game is actually built around playing those. In D&D, they're just kind of set dressing, and I'd love to see D&D sort of actually reward people for, focusing on those parts of their characters.
Well, and it also sort of feels like alignment is kind of a half-hearted sort of artifact of previous editions of the game, where we can never really decide whether alignment matters or not.
Yeah.
I mean, back in AD&D, like your alignment mattered. Whether you detected as good or evil was an important thing.
Right.
And now it's not quite as much that kind of. It's not. They don't have the game system telling you how to play your character.
Right.
You're allowed to play your character however you want, but the flip side of that proposition is how you play your character doesn't mechanically matter as much as it did in previous incarnations.
Right.
For good or for ill, but that's the way it is.
Definitely. Durican said, no, not doing it. Sorry, Durican. Nope. Always with the underwear. I'm not doing it. I can't humor him. He needs to learn. Durican says, would you allow to play a character that has 2 character sheets? I guess he's talking about a character that's possessed or kind of flips between one personality or the other.
I don't know why not. It depends upon whether it's disruptive to the rest of the players of the game. But Evil Hat just came out with a whole Fate world that was based on the idea that you have this, you've entered into a pact with a demon, a demonic type of entity, and you literally flip your character sheet upside down when you go into your when you allow yourself to be possessed by the demon and actually use your supernatural powers. You flip your character sheet upside down and you're now that character. I think that's a really compelling idea of the duality of the thing. If it was one character who just decided to demand the spotlight and railroad the game and gave them an avenue to screw everybody else over, well, that's a different story.
I think this comes up in a lot of situations. We were talking about something similar to this on the last roundtable, and my question would be to the player: why specifically do you want to play that, right? If you have a good, compelling reason that's interesting, sure, let's talk about it. But if it's just like, hey, because that, I don't know, it's just a thing I want to try, and or I want to be, I want more time, or I want to do more voices, like, I don't know, maybe it's not exactly the best reason, but I don't know. I mean,
I feel like it's something that, like you said, you definitely have to have an out-of-game discussion before you go ahead and plunge into doing something like that. And if it's only one player out of the rest of the group, then you need to have a discussion with the whole group of whether this is
that absolutely
proposition. I mean, I've played in games where one of the characters was actually at odds, trying to essentially corrupt everybody else in the party, and we all knew this at the table as players, and yet we're trying to kind of dance on this razor's edge of like, who knows what, who actually knows what, and it's a very difficult thing to maneuver.
Yeah, those are absolutely things that, like, that I would say never do that if the rest of the party doesn't know, right? Because when you flip that card on them, they're just all gonna be pissed. No one's gonna be happy about that.
I mean, one of the key tenets of the fact that we're sort of doing this consensual storytelling experience is that there has to be a built-in level of trust in terms of where the story goes. The D&D is a team sport, right? So when you're going to change that dynamic, you are messing with one of the fundamental building blocks and assumptions that's built into the game.
Right. Question: split the party or never split the party?
I guess it depends upon how badly you're going to split the party. I mean, I don't mind having a little kind of like split scene type of things happen at my table, as long as they're sort of brief and I don't have to do a lot of logistical tracking of who's doing what, or kind of track of, like, it's very easy to like have time flow at a different pace for one group than it does for the other group, and it turns into kind of a logistical nightmare. So generally, I think it's kind of, like I said, D&D is a team sport. Why are you splitting the party? Because that's not a team move. If I've presented that sort of difficult choice to you, either I need to be prepared for it. Okay, you guys are going to go here. You're going to go down to the city tower. You're going to go check out the market. And then the players know I'm going to be focusing some attention on them, and you guys kind of tune out. I'm gonna, and that's okay. But otherwise, I think it's disrespectful, number one, to the DM, who now has to try and manage two things that are going on. But it's also disrespectful to the other players,
right? Because it might force some players to essentially do nothing for a while.
Well, I mean, I don't know how you get away with not forcing half of the table to sit and listen to you have your interaction. Unless you've got co-DMs.
I think, like, it's interesting mostly because I think there are times when it can work in certain situations. For example, we were playing our horror game, and due to something players were in the dream dimension, and they had this lantern that they can light to change between the dream dimension and the real world, and they're in a fight, and half the party is over there on one side of the room, and half the party's on this side of the room, and the guest player is like trying to get his hands on the lantern because he wants to smash it, and the lantern gets lit, and the guest player and one of the party members and the monster get transported to the real world, and the other half is left in the dream world, right? And we essentially cut, like, that was the end of the episode, like that was where we cut it. And then the next episode, it was, I had to be really, really careful in how I did it, because it's like, okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna focus on one group, we're gonna move them through the story a little bit, and right when they get to a really tense point, we're gonna cut to the other group, right? But because it's half the party, I know, it's going to be relatively equal time split between them. But if it's, if other, like, those rare situations, it can be manageable, but in large part, I think it's probably just not going to be fun for most people, right? If you're not actively working to make it fun.
Right. I mean, it comes down to why are you splitting the party? It's the same thing, like, why do you want to play two character sheets? Because that's essentially what you're doing, is you're now dividing the DM's time, and that means that half of the group is not going to benefit from that. Now, I have also seen, opportunities where we send two characters off, but then you come in and you guys take over these three NPCs, right? So the whole group is getting attention, and the party's technically split, but everybody gets to participate because you're now taking the the place of the, in saving throw we do a thing called flashbacks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the chat can unlock a flashback, and when the players want to gain advantage in a particular situation, they can trigger a flashback that indicates why they might be particularly good at a particular thing, or they might know something. So for instance, in the last episode, they needed to know some infernal words, like just any word in infernal would help give them an advantage in the situation. And so I said, all right, well, they said, I'm going to trigger a flashback and explain why I know just a few words of infernal. I don't have it on my character sheet, but I'm going to trigger a flashback. Well, then the rest of the players at the table got involved in role playing in that scene as NPCs in that scene. And even though one player was in the flashback, the whole table was participating.
That's really interesting, and I'm probably gonna have to steal that idea.
Well, that's why I play online, right? So everyone can benefit. Take what works for you, ignore everything else. And I will just say, my standard blanket disclaimer is that if you are having fun,
right,
and your players are having fun, then my advice doesn't matter.
I honestly, I just love, I love when people introduce me to new ideas, like new things to try at the table that I have never thought of or have never, I'm like, oh, I don't, probably wouldn't work for every group, but I can think of some groups where that might be a cool thing to play around with, right?
I will say that it does take the players a moment to kind of wrap their head around
to get used to it.
Exactly how they're going to deploy this thing, because I say, you can't just out and out change time, right? You can't go back and say, oh, okay, well,
I already did that, this. It's already pulled because I already pulled it.
Yeah, I murdered the villain's mother in the past, and therefore he doesn't exist. No, you can't change the fundamental given circumstances. I mean, a lot of this is stolen from Blades in the Dark.
Right.
Where instead of worrying about how to do the heist, you're just doing the heist, and then you do flashbacks to explain how you're overcoming these various things. So.
Speaking of Blades in the Dark, while we wait for a couple more questions in chat. Have you played it? Are you a Blades in the Dark guy?
I haven't had the opportunity to play it yet. I really want to play it. I'm a huge fan of John Harper.
John's a good guy.
Yeah, if you go and look at the body of work that he's built up to Blades in the Dark, we ran a version of The Wildlings, which is a game that he started and never actually finished. I did a hack of that as our session 0 for the Iron Keep Chronicles, and it worked brilliantly. It was super fun. I'm also a big fan of Danger Patrol. If you want to learn how to improvise on the moment, it's free. Go download Danger Patrol and play that. It's amazing. My wife introduced me to it, and I love it.
Blades in the Dark is such a weird thing, mostly because I have the special edition of the book. I've been flipping through it a little bit, but I've never, my friends run a Blades in the Dark stream, but I've never played it myself. But I had John Harper on the show talking about Blades in the Dark right before it exploded in popularity, and it got on role play, and everyone was playing it. So it was it's really been interesting, and it's been one of those things where it just has so many interesting ideas and ways of dealing with with character stuff, like the experience system, which kind of very much mimics the Burning Wheel system, about getting I love, and I want to find a way to incorporate this sort of Burning Wheel Blades in the Dark style experience system at the end of the session into into D&D somehow. It's just some cool stuff in there, man.
I think we live in a time where there's so much experimentation going on with tabletop RPGs in general that it's exciting to me to see new people come into the hobby through Dungeons and Dragons, because that's what they're most familiar with. But it's especially exciting for me to see people go on to experiment and play different things. I mean, look at Honey Heist, right? Grant Howe basically started a Patreon that was I'm going to release a game every month that's one page. It's a super weird, kind of gritty punk rock, one-page kind of format. It's very experimental, and yet he hit upon that magic idea that everybody's I want to play this game, and maybe it's not a campaign, but who cares? You're having a great night of gaming, and nobody had to work hard at it. Right? Nobody had to read 192 pages, maps and handouts and stat blocks to figure out what's happening. No, we're all bears, and we're at a convention, and we're trying to steal some freaking honey.
Do you have a favorite one page ridiculous RPG?
Oh, I probably do. I'm trying to think of which one it is. I mean,
Big Motherfucking Crab Truckers is absolutely my favorite thing. I will never not love running that game.
um, I fall back on Danger Patrol, but I have
Right.
my own hack of Danger Patrol, which is inspired by Thundar the Barbarian. That I call Beastmasters of Yagamore.
I love it.
And yeah, and so we improvise essentially a Thundar the Barbarian game using Danger Patrol, but I've reskinned everything so that it fits into the kind of the weird
Mhm.
post-apocalyptic kind of Saturday morning cartoon adventure format, whereas Danger Patrol is much more kind of a pulp,
Yeah.
a Flash Gordon-y type of feel to it, Red Menace type of thing. And this is much more like, I love taking pop culture stuff from like 1997 and before, and then going, okay, there was, the moon has crashed into the earth, and now here it is 100 years later or 200 years later, and there's magic and super science, and let's go to town on taking all that kind of Gamma World-esque pop culture stuff and remixing it into the weird alternate future that we find ourselves in.
Oh man. I just have a soft spot in my heart for any kind of like one page stupid RPG. Like Everyone is John and all those things.
Yeah.
Like I love them.
Right. We play a lot of Roll for Shoes on the Saving
Roll
Throw.
for Shoes. I love it. I haven't gotten a chance to play it though.
Yeah, we have, all of our stuff is available on our YouTube archive too. So if anybody hears something and we're like, what's that like? I ran Tales from the Loop. You can go check that out. But yeah, Jordan Caves Callerman runs a wicked game of Roll for Shoes. We've played Fiasco too, and a bunch of. The great thing about Saving Throw Show is we play a lot of different.
You guys experiment with a lot of stuff. I wish I had that format.
Yeah, that's nice. We should take some more viewer questions because
let's do it. Let's do it. Okay. Short Manion says, if you had the power to add 2 extra days to your week, what game would you add to your roster? If you had more time to play, what would you play?
I mean, I would play Blades. I just had a really great experience playing Tales from the Loop, so I would love to dive into a campaign of that. That would be really interesting to see where that goes as a campaign. We played that for our charity stream here a few weeks back, and I'm one of those people, like, I follow a lot of tabletop RPG Kickstarters, and sometimes I get a little burned out on, like, is this as big as the hype?
Right.
Is the hype actually going to pay off? And it was one of those games that I saw it and I saw the art was amazing and it seemed inspirational, but I was a little tight on cash at the time, and I didn't really know where the system was at, and so I took a pass on it, and I really regretted taking a pass on it, having played it, and it does such a great job of capturing a very specific moment in time. Right. And I have found myself drawn, don't read anything into this the wrong way, but I have found myself drawn to stories about teenagers, of people who stand on the brink of adulthood, where they're old enough to be independent, but their life is really dramatic and really emotional, and there's a lot of their life that they're not in control of, but they're just on the brink of asserting their individuality. And Tales from the Loop does a great job of capturing that frustration and that potential that lies before you, and delivering on a great storytelling thing. So I that's just kind of my flavor of the week lately. It's I just had such a potent experience with that. I would love to play some sort of cyberpunk game, either Beyond the Veil or any of the Apocalypse World variants on Cyberpunk. I would love to get into that again, because I had all of those original Cyberpunk 2020 books, and then I played in a game at Big Bad Con, not this past year, but the year before, that was just brilliant. That was run by this guy who did his homebrew Apocalypse World version called Tears and Kisses in the Rain, and it's amazing. It was just amazing experience that has drawn me, like, kind of keeps circling around my inspiration. So it's hard for me to pick. I've got Numenera on the shelf here. I've got
I was gonna say probably not new. Well, it might be Numenera, but man, I definitely want to try Invisible Sun.
Yeah, right. I'm waiting for that to
Oh,
come
man.
too. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
was gonna say if I had to pick two, it would probably be right now. It would probably be Blades in the Dark and Invisible Sun, just because they've been two that have been dominating my Twitter feed and all that stuff for like the last
Right.
year, and I'm like, I just want to play. Just let me play, please. I talked to Shauna at Gen Con. I'm like, come on, let's do something. Let's play some Invisible Sun, please.
I think they're starting up an actual play, but I don't know
Yeah,
if it's
with One Shot RPG, I think.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had just heard that about that from them. I don't know. I couldn't afford the box, and I don't have anyone around me to split the cost of a box with, so I'm sad about that.
Right. Yeah, I feel you.
Kingdom Death Monster too, maybe. Oh man, I want to play that game.
Yeah, I'm.
Ambivalent.
Well, I don't know if I want to broach this topic.
Fair enough.
Here's the thing: the miniatures on that game are so graphic.
Right. No,
That
I know
it
they
turns
are.
me off. Like, and I don't consider myself like a prude or whatever, but I do feel like, so just to harken back to something that we brought up earlier in the conversation, where I talked about like Dungeon Bastard started this satirical kind of over the top kind of like grognardy buffoon who was telling you the proper way to play Dungeons and Dragons, and has slowly changed into something completely different. And part of it is I feel like I have a responsibility as a voice in the community to lobby for a more diverse and inclusive experience for everyone who wants to come and play our game. Because I firmly believe that whoever wants to come into this hobby should be able to find a seat at a table. You know, if you don't necessarily agree with somebody politically, find a way to put your differences aside and have a fun story about elves shooting flaming arrows at giant, metallic dragons. Like you can make it work. And so I feel like things like that are very overtly explicit and feel to me like they come from a place of a male gaze, which tells people like
I
I
understand. I don't want to argue about this. I'm just like, the reason I find that so interesting is because some of the most enthusiastic mini painters of that game, and one of the people, the last person who actually ran it for me was one of the D20 babes.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And we had a blast playing it. And it's like, I mean, I understand that there might be some people who are turned off of the game because of the minis, but like, I've never had the experience of anyone at the table being like, the people have been more grossed out, in my opinion, in my experience, by the monsters, which I'm all about, right? I love the monsters in that game.
Right. Yeah,
but again,
I've seen for that. They're very Cthulhuid, like
they're really weird and out there.
Yeah,
I've stolen some bits of their design for my my horror game.
I understand the appeal, and certainly I'm not saying you can't enjoy that game or that thing or whatever it is. Like it's ultimately your game. So like if everyone at the table is having fun and everyone is consenting to what's going on, play whatever style of game that you want. But when you elevate, a game that says, okay, this is a $7 million Kickstarter, this is what's really hot in tabletop RPGs right now, and it's a bunch of half-naked women, and it sends a message to the people who are not inside the community that's like, oh, okay, all those nerds are into half-naked women still. I get it. Okay, well, that's for them. That's fine. It keeps people out. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, yeah, fair enough. I totally understand the criticism of it. I also think it's just a fun ass game. Like you could probably like. You're right. I think the artist is a very specific type of artist, and it's his art, and so okay, that's.
I'm not saying don't have that thing. I'm just saying when that Kickstarter blew up through the sky, I did not get interested in it because it felt like
fair enough.
It was a certain niche of culture that I'm not particularly interested in or attached to.
But if you do, did you buy yourself an Invisible Sun box? Because if you do, you'll have to tell me how it plays, because I'm gonna be so jealous.
I'm just waiting for it. I mean, there's so many props in that thing.
I know. I saw it. I'm like, how do you? There's so much stuff. They just keep adding stuff to the box. Oh man. Horseman War 101 says, "What are your top 5 game systems that you've played?" That's a similar question, but man, a lot of them.
Top 5 game systems that I've played. and I don't know how to. I would have to qualify that, right?
Right.
You know, like like system wise, it all goes into what the experience is, right?
Right.
And what your goal is for that thing. You know, like obviously the thing that has created passion for me in my life and has caused me to dedicate so much of my time to this hobby are things that that I explored through Dungeons and Dragons, right? And I'm a big fan of Fifth Edition. I really think they got it right, and
Hmm.
I think it's a very enjoyable experience, and it's true to the Dungeons and Dragons that I grew up playing. So it's a faithful representation, but a new streamlined design that it makes more sense and has some interesting filigree to it. But that being said, I also love games where there's compelling consequences and opportunity for moments of high drama, right?
Hmm.
Like if you look at like how Fate Core is constructed, it's all designed to create relationships and for your characters to get into trouble.
Right.
And I think in contrast to like Dungeons and Dragons is all about your characters getting into trouble that they can manage, right?
Right.
Whereas something like Fate or even Apocalypse World is about consequences that get away from you, or especially Fiasco,
Right.
right? So it's tough to me to give like, bam, here's
It's
five games that you should absolutely be playing right now, because that's such a personal kind of thing. I love Fiasco. I had a great time playing Tales from the Loop. I think that uh, you know
I
Monty
think
Cook's ideas are always inspirational to me. No matter how the mechanics come together, no matter how it's constructed, the world that he paints, and especially with with Bruce and Sean and everybody who's on board, like playing that game is interesting and fun. But it also, you can just sit down with it and it's gorgeous and lushly
right.
illustrated
Right. Right.
and brilliant. Um, I think in terms of like beginner games, like how can you go wrong with like Fate Accelerated, where it's just here's five easy numbers and let's roll some dice and away we go. I love Dungeon Worlds for the idea of all of its consequences and things like that.
Yeah.
So for me to pick five for sure that I love, it's tough.
Just
It's very specific to my taste.
just to add on to that, right? Like it's whoa, sorry, Manicam, what are you doing? It's entirely like subjective in the sense of like what is your experience when you played this game? Because for example, I played Warhammer Fantasy RP once, right? I didn't particularly enjoy it, not because I don't like Warhammer, and not because I don't like the universe, and not because anything about the system particularly didn't appeal to me. It's just the way that the one time I played, and the way that I played, and the way the DM handled it, I didn't have a great time, and it didn't
Right.
encourage me to come back to the system. And so I think like the system that I may love, or the system that I may not have a great experience with, could literally be down to the people or the way I played it. And that doesn't necessarily reflect the system as a whole. And so yeah, you're right. It's such a personal thing. Like for example, I love Paranoia, right? It's just
Right.
I've
Yeah.
never had a bad time playing Paranoia. But I also understand that it's probably not everyone's cup of tea, right? It might not. Some people might not get into it. Some people might have a weird time with it. What I was gonna mention something else that I slipped my tongue, but yeah, it's like
I will say, like, I love Fiasco. I think Fiasco is
right,
brilliant, but it is very dependent upon you having the right group of players who are all kind of like jiving on the same level, right?
yeah,
If there's some kind of if there's a disconnect between how people are approaching or interacting in that game, it just kind of falls flat.
right.
I would be remiss not to mention Dread too. I think
Dread is so good.
is an
If
amazing
you have
play.
a great storyteller, Dread is I think is probably one of the best horror experiences you can have at a tabletop.
Yeah.
I would feel remiss if I did not mention. I don't know if you've played this before. I've been playing a lot of Mouse Guard recently, which is a burning wheel hack, or I wouldn't call it a hack. It's a burning wheel creation.
Right.
But Mouse Guard is one of those things where if you approach it having only played D&D, you will probably spend a lot of time not liking Mouse Guard, because whereas you mentioned D&D is designed to it gives you situations and you are the hero by the end of it, right? No matter how many dice you roll, you will eventually be the hero by the end of the session or by the end of the campaign. Mouse Guard is not that game, right? In Mouse Guard, you will roll and you will fail, and even when you succeed, you don't feel like a hero at the end of it. The enjoyment comes from the little moments between you and the world and the characters between those, you know, and
Right.
It's such an interesting system, and it let me explore so many different aspects of RPGs, but I can easily see how it wouldn't be for everyone.
I guess I would say that I enjoy games with consequences. That's important. Like
Right.
your actions matter, and when you do something, there's a change in the world, or there's a change in the relationships within the characters, or whatever. And the other thing that, just parenthetically, that I'll add is, like, if there's something that I'm burned out on, is I'm burned out on Cthulhu.
Right.
Like I
As a system or as a concept?
a little
Both?
bit. Well, no, the system's fine. Like I don't necessarily disagree with, like, you know, the beautiful thing about that system is it's very elegant in terms of you have a percentile chance to do anything, and you just roll and it happens. You know, I have a 50% chance to drive this car. Great. 49, I drive the car. It's like the mechanics are very straightforward.
Right.
In that respect. So I like how approachable it is for newbies. But I feel like since it went into the public domain, we've sort of been flooded with Cthulhu stuff. And I get the storyline of man's futile struggle against powers that are beyond his ken, but okay.
Right.
Like, you once you do that, or you've played through that experience, then it either takes on the Scooby-Doo quality of, well, all right, let's see how crazy everybody can go.
Right.
Or it just becomes a little tread worn. So
Fair enough.
That's my thing, you know.
Why don't we make this the last question, because I know we're running short on time, but Jigmang did want to get this in, and I didn't want to leave him hanging. He says, first time running a Shadowrun campaign, it's proving that I'm far more comfortable with morally ambiguous or heavy consequences. Any advice, as my group are all old school sort of D&D players, and they're not really enjoying, I guess, the heavy kind of consequences. And I know what he means, because, for example, one of my Mouse Guard DMs, he loves delivering choices where you feel like shit no matter which one you pick, right? Like, you can either say, you know, have the village, you know, get food for the winter, and your Tenderpaw will hate you because you didn't help him out, or you can help him out and then the whole village starves, right?
Right.
Like, you don't feel good taking either of them.
I think that's a very tricky situation, because I expect that there's some sort of, like, fundamental disconnect happening here between what the GM's conception of the campaign premise is and what the player's conception of that premise is. And especially with Shadowrun. Now, full disclosure, I've never played a single session of Shadowrun, but I am steeped enough in the culture to know that it's basically about rolling shit piles of D6s and murderating kind of like anything that comes your way with your special talent or craft or whatever it is, right? Like, you are ultimate fantasy badasses with sci-fi weapons and cyber decks and all that kind of fun stuff, right? I don't know that it is the ideal genre in which to deliver difficult moral choices.
Right.
And some of that is just the system, right? Like it is so kind of like gritty and mechanical that it attracts that type of player who goes,
really complex system.
Yeah, like okay, so now I go down this life path, and then I take these 3 skill choices, and I add this neural chip, and I get an extra 96 onto my, you know, SMG full auto, like, slugfest roll or whatever it is, right? I don't know the game terminology at all, as is obvious.
Could have fooled me. No, I would have bought that.
but the point is that it's a lot of working parts that kind of, like, come together to make you, like, it appeals to specialist type of characters, right?
That's a very contrasting emotion from, like, you have to choose between saving civilians or, like, saving your mother, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's two very, very contrasting things between that and the heavy mechanical embellishments.
Right, and it's not a system that's designed to reward. So with that particular style of GM game of like, I'm going to offer you heavy consequences, I'm going to give you a tough choice, right? That's sort of a dungeon worldy style of play, if you want to call it that, or Apocalypse World or whatever. But the point being, like, in Apocalypse World or in Dungeon World, I have bonds, I have relationships to other players, and I can exploit those to mechanical effect. And also, if I roll badly, then there's going to be consequences attached to that, right? Whereas in Shadowrun, I imagine, for number one, I don't get any mechanical benefit by being teamed up with the half-orc shaman. Like, who cares? Mm-hmm. I could substitute that guy in with literally any other player character and have the dwarf machine gunner. And yes, he has a different mechanical set of stats, but our relationship does not exist in a mechanical space. Right? Whereas in something like Dungeon World, it does actually matter, like, the fact that the bard is writing the story of my epic adventures, right? That they're a hanger-on of mine, and I feel like I have to take care of them. Or my parents took them in when they were orphaned by some sort of horrible thing that nobody talks about. And so we're essentially, adoptive brothers or whatever. But I can actually exploit that relationship mechanically. But to have that sort of tough choice stuff means that the player characters have to be invested in relationships either with each other or with other NPCs or corporations or whatever that are meaningful to them, that actually have impact in their lives. And for a very combat heavy game that's really kind of like deck and run kind of stuff, like Shadowrun is, I don't think that those types of relationships, I don't think most players are going to take advantage of that kind of depth of nuance, right?
Yeah.
They want to have the classic cyberpunk experience of, we find out, we hack the black ice, we get dropped in by helicopter behind the security compound, we pop our way either into or out of the multi-story spirally industrial complex, steal the AI, and get exfilled out.
Yeah, I think the important thing is right. If you want, because if you're looking for a medium between you wanting to drop heavy consequences on your players and your players just wanting to shoot stuff, then I think you have to find a way to essentially make their choices reflected in how they're rewarded, or how they're paid out, right? Whether it be at the end of the mission they get extra money for how many hostages are left alive, or if they what, I don't know, I don't know a situation off the top of my head, but like, for example, Burning Wheel, I guess Apocalypse World does this too, but Burning Wheel at the end of the session, right, you say, okay, we're done with the turns, let's go into the reward phase. In the reward phase we say, who was the team MVP, right? Who made that critical play or made the critical choice, right? Who role-played their character to the best of their ability? And there's the embodiment award, who did the best role-playing or in-character stuff. There's the person the workhorse, the person who did the most roles or just made the most attempts at accomplishing their goal. Those all get rewarded with points, with fate or persona points.
Right.
And so that and then you get those for doing your goal, your belief, and your instinct. So if you want to encourage the players to engage more with those choices and those role-playing moments and those character things, then essentially you have to find a way to reward them for it, right? Whether that means at the end sitting down and saying, like, yes, you get a little bit of extra credits for accomplishing this or for picking your choice, or you get more this to spend, or this NPC's disposition, whatever. But you have to find a way to kind of sit down and make them feel like it's worth it for them to make those choices, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I struggle with that idea because the way I perceive that is you're still essentially commoditizing relationships.
Fair enough.
If you save X number of hostages, or if you go and rescue your love interest from the clutches of the bad guy, instead of, or whatever, but you're still like mechanically rewarding them for something. And I think the opportunities where these moments truly become memorable is when the attachment goes
Right.
beyond the game mechanics.
And that's why I said like, I don't suggest it as a cure all forever, but I think of it in my head, at least. It seems like a way to experiment with getting the players to dabble in more than just beelining to the end of the mission, right? When they
Right.
if you reward them for playing their goals, their connections, their bonds, you might eventually get to the point where they just start doing those things without needing to be prompted. I don't know. It might not work.
Yeah.
I don't there like the answer, I think, is there may not be a perfectly happy middle ground between those two extremes.
Well, I think part of what you're bumping up against um, is is a trust issue,
Right.
right? Like the players don't want to give you in a Shadowrun type of scenario, they don't want to give you meaningful relationships because they know that all you're going to do is you're going to put, that love interest in jeopardy. You're going to put my mom, tied to a burning stack of dynamite or whatever it is, and you're just going to use it as like a plot hammer
lever,
to make
yeah.
stuff that I don't want to, that I wouldn't otherwise do. And so I think what you need to do is kind of like find a middle ground there and do a thing where you ask leading questions.
Right.
So get them to set up some relationships, but then give them some agency to kind of determine like how deep down the well they want to go.
Right.
So it might be something like, it's Friday night, you hear the police sirens going off. What's happening at your girlfriend's apartment right now that she's worried about? Okay. Now that sets up a situation where you go, okay, well, obviously she's in some sort of situation. She's in some sort of, she's having a problem. But I, as the player, now have some agency to go, okay, she's really worried because there's a police chase going on, and it seems like the burglar is in her apartment complex, and she knows that the locking mechanisms on her doors, on all the doors in the apartment building, have been twitchy lately. Somebody's been hacking them on and off, and they don't work reliably. Okay, well, now all of a sudden we have like a compelling situation going on where, okay, I'm concerned about this NPC and it feels very real, but it also feels like me as the player, like I have some control. I'm not letting the DM just screw me over,
Right.
like pound me in the head with what's going on. I've actually can meet it at whatever level I'm now comfortable with. So if I feel like, this is a weird kind of uncomfortable space for me, I'm going to make some safe choices, then the DM goes, okay, that's fine. You deal with it on that level. If they're really bold and they make some really, intense choices, then you can pursue that as well.
Right.
That would be my advice in this whole situation. Stop presenting things to your players and start
working with them.
Into because especially with that particular game with Shadowrun, like it's not designed.
You're at a slight disadvantage. I feel like I should have mentioned this, by the way, in my little rant, and this will be the last thing I say about this. The way the question is set up implies that you're looking for a way to do this during the game without them realizing that it's being done. When I think this is something that should be talked about. Right? You sit down and have a conversation about that, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm never a fan of, like, just passively aggressively trying to get your players to do a certain thing or engage with it. Like, no. You sit down and you talk about it and you see, like, hey, guys, can we experiment with this, this thing? Because that's just I always, with RPGs, always talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also a fan of, like, having some sort of, like, escape mechanism, whether it's an X card or whatever, or just timeout, like, hey, this is starting to get into territory.
Right.
I mean, for a lot of people, the idea that there's some sort of home invasion going on that involves a significant other could be like really like traumatizing or bring up some sort of bad memories or just not an experience they want to explore. Okay, timeout. Can we talk about this?
Yeah.
Or just let's rewind, reset the situation.
So yeah, and that's why I say just have that conversation. Don't just drop it on your players. Like, talk about it, see what they're comfortable with. You'll have the best results there. Man, that was a complex but interesting question to end on, but I think that is where we're gonna have to hang it up for the night, guys. Thank you so much, everyone in chat, for your questions. Thank you so much for hanging out, and a huge thank you to Mr. Tom for spending this time with me, man. It's very enlightening and interesting conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you want to see any of my games, you can either go over to the Saving Throw Show Twitch channel or join the YouTube action over there. But generally, we put most things on Twitch. That's kind of where we live right now. So you can go to
You
Twitch.
preempted me. I was gonna say, where can people follow you on the internet and find more about what you do? But
there you go. It's right there in chat.
Yep.
So you can click on that and you can see either my DM prep stream. If you have more questions about your game, generally on Thursdays, I entertain sort of open-ended, like D&D or RPG advice. Tuesdays is more kind of like, let's gear up, let's get our head around what's going to happen on Wednesday night. That's what we did today. So you're welcome to join, or just hit me up on Twitter, shoot me a question, and I'll be happy to give as much of a response as I can. And the new 280 characters, which
oh my god! I asked Ivan. I said, "What are you gonna do with the new 280 characters? What are you gonna do? You use the, or are you 140 on principle?"
Well, no, I'm not. I might be if it actually had the little counter still attached to it, but it has that.
It's the wheel, the weird wheel.
And so I'm like, I don't know, like, where is exactly halfway? So the only thing that I've noticed is I tend not to edit myself quite as tightly. I used to, spend
Oxford comma out the door.
Yeah, I would spend 5 minutes agonizing, like, how do I trim this down to a single tweet? I have very complicated feelings about Twitter. I love it. It's how I met my wife, so it's a fascinating experiment, but it is definitely a very limited medium in terms of I might tweet a thread about something and only the first thing will get RT'd and nobody else. It's very clear nobody else read the rest of the thread. It's like, all right, even though I put thread one of whatever, everybody's like, blam! I put a thing out there once about random encounters that was a little clickbaity, and everybody kind of like burned it, and they're like, whoa, why are you making random encounters? They can be great. And I'm like, they can be great, but not as they're commonly presented. Maybe if you'd read 6 tweets down, you'd understand, but I can't follow Twitter's bad format, right?
It's so weird. Twitter is literally the only social media, because I didn't use any before I started streaming, and I'm like, I gotta go make a Facebook too and post there. That's a lot of work. I don't want
the only thing I like about Twitter right now is that it's still not, or it's largely not algorithmized or whatever you want. It's not optimized by an algorithm. You can still, if you choose to, read it largely in chronological order.
Not on your phone though. Don't try and do that. So the phone app I literally say was the inspiration for the Westworld, because I never know whether I'm reading like the present, the past, or the future.
Oh, I've turned off all of like the moments and suggest.
Right.
I still keep it in chronological order. It's fine. Like I'm okay with that. But that's I don't follow a ton of people. I follow like 200 people. That's it. I don't care. I'm a jerk that way.
Well, guys, make sure you go check out Saving Throw Show. By the way, if you guys didn't know, Saving Throw Show is one of the awesome people in our streaming team, the Tabletop Game Network here on Twitch. They are fantastic people over there doing amazing content. Just like your friends around a table, except they're all the way in LA, but you can still chat with them. I've hung out with them for a while, and they are just good people. And Tom is one of them good people. So make sure you give him a follow on Twitter. It's at Dungeon Bastard. Unless you want people to follow you at Tom Lommel.
I don't talk about as much gaming stuff there. I mean, if you want to see pictures of my dog and or hear my views on politics, that's fine, because that's generally where I post a lot of that stuff. Or check in on my career. But most of my gaming stuff I keep on Dungeon Bastard, and I try and keep that fairly well focused on gaming related topics, Kickstarters that I think are interesting, what my schedule is for streaming and whatnot. That all lives on Dungeon Bastard still.
Fair enough. Well, guys, don't go anywhere, because there's just a couple more things we have to get through. Just some quick announcements, and then of course we're gonna go drop a host on someone else. But I want to thank you guys again for hanging out on the Fuzzy Dice Show. This has been a fantastic episode. As always, we do this every week, every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. I hang out with all the coolest people in the role-playing world. Who knows who you may see coming on next. You'll see probably me announcing it on Twitter at some point. But if this is your first time here on the Exploding Dice channel, welcome. If you enjoyed the show, please hit that follow button. You can get all kinds of content. And if you really, really enjoyed the show, you can hit that subscribe button and help us do some more stuff. Also, we just launched our Patreon. It's patreon.com/explodingdice. When we hit 10 patrons, we're going to start doing patron-only DM hangouts, as well as some other cool stuff. For subscriptions in Patreon, you can get ways to interact with our games live on stream. But we do an entire week of roleplay content here. Tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern is the Daubers. See episode 3, finale of that mini-series. It is a whimsical fantasy adventure, and you get to see us save the forest or just be really weird. I play a senile old rat folk druid called Fern the Rat. He has mushrooms growing on his back, and he wild shapes into a swarm of rats. He's a giant rat that wild shapes into a bunch of rats, and it's amazing.
Absolutely none of that is disturbing in any way.
No, it's great. I love it. And then, of course, Thursday, guys, we just announced this on Twitter. It's going to be coming after Thanksgiving, but Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern, we are launching Razor Coast, an all-female pirate campaign here on the channel with a fantastic cast that you can see announced on Twitter and in Discord, and it is going to be a blast. It's going to be swashbuckling and treasure hunting and weird gods and goddesses and all kinds of cool stuff, and I can't wait. Friday, of course, we have off because I'm at home playing my home campaign, but Saturday you can join us at 10 p.m. Eastern for Writhing Moon, our open legend horror campaign. Last week, someone exploded, they fought a giant eldritch wet nurse, and Gurney proposed his love for Felix, and it was an emotional session. You guys should definitely check it out on the VOD. If you like horror and gore and mystery, it's all there. And then, of course, Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern, is the DM's Table. That's our roundtable show where me and all of your favorite Twitch DMs get together for 2 hours and talk about our own games and how to up your DM game. We take questions from the audience and we talk about, how to improve and be better DMs. And it's a lot of fun, and you should definitely be there. And then, of course, at 10 p.m. Eastern, we have The Dark Spring, our Mouse Guard campaign, where I am a player on the forefronts, is in the DM chair, and some amazing streamers are hanging out with me to play, and it's hilarious, and it's ridiculous, and we're coming straight out of Spruce Tuck, and you should definitely be there. Monday, I tend to play Mouse Guard over on Bubbernaw's channel, and then we're back to Tuesdays where I do Fuzzy Dice. You guys get the point. That's it.
We've come around the horn the full week.
Just all week. You guys should definitely, if you have not already, check out the Discord. It's right there, the Bomb Squad Discord, where you can keep up with everything we do. And seriously, thank you guys so much for being here. I think that's gonna be it for us. Let me go check my my Twitch board real quick for someone to drop a host on. Let me just refresh this real quick, and we'll find someone. While once again I thank Tom for hanging out, man. I want to say, man, I hope you had a good time. I know I certainly did, and
absolutely,
hopefully we will find a way to perhaps have you back on in the future.
All of my RPG knowledge came out right there.
Well then, then next time we'll just talk about the little bit that you've accumulated between now and then okay. The rest will just be fart noises, I guess.
Well, if you think I can talk for 2 more hours, I'll see what I can do.
All right. Well, I think we're gonna go drop a host probably on Goobers. I think he is doing some charity right now. He's doing the Metal Meal Meltdown. He's raising money for the kids. He's been doing a whole week of cooking streams, and he's a big D&D guy. So we're gonna go drop the love on him with a raid command. But you guys have been awesome. Thank you guys for watching. Let me drop the raid, raid, the goo, there we go. As always, thank you guys for watching. We will see you next time, but as always, don't let Dice Thulu get his tentacles on you, because he gets very handsy when he does. We'll see you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye, guys.
Look at that shit. Look at that shit. You better fucking believe it. Exploding dice, saving the house! Okay, alright. Oven is prepped. Until it's golden brown. During the last 15 to 20 minutes, cover the crust edge with the strips of foil to prevent excessive browning. Let it stand for 5 minutes before serving. Eh, fuck it. I'm not gonna do that much. Alright. Oh wait, no, I need to adjust this just a bit here. Because I've actually got to do one quick thing. I've got to flute it. I do have to flute it. So I'm actually going to take these guys off here.